Dear writer, don't quit your day job. No, no, no. Hear me out. Just let me finish. If you are expecting that this video is going to be some kind of diatribe about how nobody's a good enough writer to be a full-time writer, etc., that's not what this is, I promise. My goal when I'm doing any kind of content that I'm releasing is always to try to help as many authors as possible have author for life careers. So you're not going to hear any of that negativity around here. Obviously, we talk in other videos about the reality of how often it is likely that a individual person might be a full-time writer, and it is not as likely as I think we want it to be. But also, statistics have no relevance on you as an individual person when it comes to deciding whether you should try to do what you want to do in your writing career. And I want to be clear also, what I am not trying to do is convince anyone not to try to do something they already want to do. This video is going to help two versions of people. It's going to help the people who feel like they have to shoot for being a full-time writer or else there's some kind of bad professional. And it's going to help the people who already don't want to be a full-time writer feel like they have some ammunition to talk back to people who tell them, no, you have to do this. This is the way to be, etc. Right? Like, so essentially it's to confirm intuition that you would already have, or to question the premise of something that you believe to be true because you just don't have as much big picture down from the top down perspective of the industry as, say, somebody who's coached 6,000 plus individual writers like I have. So what I'm trying to do in this particular content, even though it does say, Dear writer, don't quit your day job. Yeah, definitely. That is for sure the title. But the sentiment behind it is please align yourself in the way that makes the most sense for you and the way that's the most likely to produce success for you, which is what we do around here. That's always the goal, to get you more of what you want out of your career. So let's talk about it. So if we're going to question the premise of the statement, everyone should be a full-time writer, or if you love writing, you'll want to be a full-time writer, or only full-time writers are professional writers, then we have to start with history, first of all. The number of people over the course of history who have been absolutely influential writers who have had other means of producing income security is so high. It's such a high percentage. It's almost not even worth parsing through it. The number of people who are actually relying on writing to pay their bills over the course of history of writing is so small. And there's an element of that that's systemic, right? When we were under New York rules, which was previous to about 2010, when we were under New York rules, it meant somebody else was making all of the publishing decisions about whether or not your book deserved to get in front of readers. And therefore, somebody was paying you for work that you had already produced, and they were deciding what that work was worth, right? So under those rules, it's natural that more and more and more people are not going to be able to make a full-time living because the book's producing income, the majority of that income was going to the publisher and not directly to the writer. So I know there are going to be people who will argue with the caveat about most writers were not full-time, but it is important to note that really significant works of literature and art, really significant works of entertainment, in writing were produced by having no stakes for the writer and their creativity. And what I don't mean in stakes is that you don't care if it gets published or not, or you don't care about the book. What I mean is your financial security, that bottom level of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is not tied to whether or not the book does well. Because once the outcome is tied to your financial security and whether or not you can keep a roof over your head, you're more likely to go into fight or flight responses about things that might impact book sales. And the most important thing you can remember is that nothing can promise whether a book will or won't sell. The only way to know for sure whether a book will or won't sell is to release it. That's the only way to know. You can't actually know what's going to happen before it happens, which is why tying your financial security to writing outcomes can be so dangerous because this is an entertainment industry primarily. This is not an organic, like a this is not a garden where you plant seeds and if you water them and get the light right, that everything will just grow. That's not what this industry is. It's not organic like that. This industry is an entertainment industry, which means by nature it is capricious because there's so much money at stake and there are so many people competing for that money. Even when there were fewer people competing, 10, 15 years ago, there still was a high level of competition both from publishers, which are venture capitalist businesses. They are using an author's book to test the market, to test whether or not there is desire for this particular type of book or this world or these characters or whatever. But they are taking a chance. So it is speculative by nature. And when things are both competitive and speculative, that creates some issues. Because when something is competitive, it means that the more money is at stake, the more likely the sharks are to come in and try and take the money. And that is not always other writers. So we have to be cautious about how we judge other people in this industry. It is often people who have the capacity to make speculation. So they have an amount of money they can spend on something. They know that they can make a high amount of money back if they get the right hit. So they want to speculate on that asset, on a book or on a publishing venture or whatever. There are no publishers that are in this industry for the love of publishing. It just doesn't exist. They can say that they are, but they're in this business to make money. And when people are in speculative, competitive industries, it changes how predictable the results are because it's so much more important that you have a means of supporting yourself securely, unless you're the type of person where insecurity doesn't bother you, because of course there are people like that. There are venture capitalist type people, and by that I mean like a personality brain wiring type, who are just willing to take chances with whatever their security comes from somewhere else, or people who have all their bills paid and their security comes from somewhere. But immediately, as soon as you start tying your well-being, your physical and psychological well-being, to whether or not your books sell, that changes the ability of your brain to process what might be at stake if the book doesn't succeed. And because we can't guarantee that books will succeed, and many of us have had unpredictable experiences in the past, we end up in this conundrum. And there's a couple of brain wiring things I want to talk about here, but we end up in this conundrum where what we need to produce the book is security, but we can't find security because my sales are going down, or things are not functioning the way that I thought they should, or the market suddenly looks saturated, or there's a disruption of some kind, or Amazon changes the rules. And every time something threatens your baseline Maslow's hierarchy, you get freaked out. And especially if there's a possibility that it might threaten it more in the future, and then our creativity shrinks and goes away. And what I'm not saying is that no one is wired to be able to be a full-time author. There are absolutely people who are wired to be able to focus and concentrate no matter what's going on in their financial stability and security, and they are able to predict and speculate and take chances and all of those things. And they tend to do better in being full-time writers just because they have an easier time producing creativity no matter what's happening financially. There also are people who are having enough financial success with their writing that they're able to continue. But as soon as that success wanes or goes away, then they're going to start struggling again. And the downside about this is if you don't know you're wired in a way that requires stability in order to function, especially financial security in order to function, you're not necessarily going to know, hey, maybe I shouldn't tie my financial security to my full-time writing. Maybe that's not a great idea for me. So if I don't know that I am like that, then I can't know ahead of time, right? So a lot of times I'm looking backwards and realizing things that are happening. And with those people, I'm always encouraging them. If your creativity is going away because you're afraid of what might happen with your books, you need to increase your financial security in any way that you can. For some of us, that might mean going to a spouse or parent, and asking for some support. For some of us, that might mean getting a part-time job. For some of us, it might mean downsizing, changing the house we live in, getting rid of debt, things like that, reorienting our budgeting, things like that. But if we don't take away that fear that comes when I think I might be seeing royalties go down or seeing income go down, then I'm not going to be able to continue to be creative. And then that's only going to make the situation worse. And I can't wish my way into being feeling more secure just because I want to. I have to be able to either solve that problem, so the physical body problem where my body gets dysregulated and then I need to work on trying to regulate my body again. And we've talked in the past, and I'll put a link to this in the show notes, about things like parachute recordings where I'm trying to address that part of myself that thinks that there's a logical way to convince myself that this is not a big problem. But the reality is, I need to feel secure. And that means I have to address the body problem and not address the logic problem. Because all of you who feel this way in the middle of a creative spurt, and all of a sudden you start worrying, like, what if I'm doing this wrong? What if the book doesn't sell, etc.? We have to answer that question because you have to be able to create security. But if you're in the middle of a creative process and suddenly your fear starts to pocket, right? Like you're starting to freak out because you don't know what will happen, and what happens if I have to go get a day job, etc. Like none of the logic that we will talk in any amount, like no logic is going to help that, because it's a security problem that's created in your physical body. This is a survival instinct, and you're not going to be able to solve a survival instinct problem with logic. You have to solve a survival instinct problem by creating more security in your physical body and allowing your defense mechanisms to rest and your survival mechanisms to rest. The problem is we try to teach our survival mechanism that it's okay by just continuing to repeat the same thing over and over again, but we don't feel the security. So what I would rather see most of you do is go to somebody like Sarah Baldwin and try to practice the regulation techniques that she teaches, or go to somebody like Claire Taylor, who works with your fear spots in your core motivations, those anchors that we talked about in one of our previous videos that are holding you in a place that is not good for you because the fear is so great that you're not able to move away, across the ocean towards success. And that's why I suggest those two people so consistently, because so many of us keep cycling into these places because we're tying so much of our financial and physical security to the writing. And then when it doesn't go well, we're trying to logic our way into, but it's going to be fine. But I know I can take off anytime, but Loki's in charge, etc. Like it's okay, but your body still feels dysregulated. So often my answer for people is we have to stop trying to convince ourselves of things and instead start trying to regulate our physical body so that we can get into a secure state and then make those decisions. And so the creativity comes back again. So when I say don't quit your day job, I mean those of you who don't have futuristic and you can't see the pathways down far enough, right? This is not the same as strategic, who's anticipating kind of mapping turns and strategies and stuff. This is the futuristic capacity to see pathways far, far down. So when a futuristic person is looking at your behavior and telling you this is where you're going to get if you keep doing this, the reason they can do that is because they can see all the way down the pathway, right? So all of the decisions that you're making have an alignment to them and you're headed in a particular direction. It's why futuristic people are better at being able to align themselves to the future that they want, and why so many people who are good at manifesting are high in futuristic, because they're able to see, oh, that decision is going to get me over there. So I better remake that next time so that I can get over here instead. Because futuristic can see the pathway, right? if we keep trying to logic our way into, but I want to be a full-time writer, but I want, but this would be more fun, this would be more exciting, which I'm not arguing with the fact that it can be both fun and exciting when it's working well. But as soon as there's any sniff of fear about what will happen if the sales go down or if the book doesn't launch well, etc., then I have to rely on my ability to regulate to keep me in my creative zone. Because there is absolutely a zone of creativity that requires fear to be not as present. It's not that fear can't be present at all. I'm not saying fear is bad. I'm saying fear for your life. Like, I think that I may not be able to feed myself if this book doesn't succeed. There are so few people, like probably not even 5% of brains have this particular combination of traits, because it is such a rare person who has the ability to shut everything out and write and work and be creative no matter what's going on in their life. And people who can compartmentalize do a little better at that. Like typically it's easier for them to hit security if they can compartmentalize and realize, hey, there's nothing I can do about the outcome. I've got to connect to my creative source right now. And then they just disconnect, right? If they can compartmentalize. Most of us can't compartmentalize when it comes to our survival instincts. We are just not as good at that. So if you can, great. Again, this video is not for you. But if you can't, you have to produce financial security somewhere that doesn't tie to your creativity. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to do 100% of your financial stability from non-writing sources, but it does mean that there are consequences to writing being your full-time income. And for those of us who have brains that need stability in order to be creative, we need security and we need to have an emotional state that's more static in terms of like we're not constantly dipping into that fear space. That is primary importance to address learning how to regulate your physical body. And again, I'm going to recommend the Sarah Baldwin course for that. The people I know who've gone through and done the actual work in that course and worked on bringing themselves into regulation more consistently are so much better off when things start to go poorly. And I know what's happening right now in the writing community is that there is a lot of instability and insecurity about the future of publishing and the future of the economy and the future of Amazon and all of these things. We know we're in the middle of a disruption. And so many of us are letting ourselves get worked up into a non-secure state about that. Like we are disconnecting from our security so often that we're losing the tether. And I need for us to focus on our regulation of our physical body. So you need to calm the fear down. And I'm not saying just calm down. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying in those moments, and I'll give you an example in a second, but in those moments, you acknowledge, I can't solve this with logic. So continuing to ask logic questions is not going to help me. It's only going to make me spiral more because this is not a logic situation. This is a situation where my body needs some calm and some presence so that I can think again. I can have an actual logical thought, because what you're doing in those moments that you start to spiral is you're not actually having logical thoughts. Your brain is trying to find the lion that it can either run away from or fight or freeze or, and now fawn. But your brain is trying to find that and it can't find it because it doesn't physically exist anywhere. So there isn't a thing that you can fight against or flee from or fawn or freeze, or there isn't a physical thing. So your brain gets confused and then it tries to cycle through the logic, right? It tries to find the logic thread there. So, for example, when I see that my sales are going down, and I think, okay, I'm paying all of my bills right now from my writing. What happens in my logic brain is that as soon as, like, I may be thinking logically about that in the moment, but as soon as I hit the spot where there's a fear that triggers the survival mechanism where like we might not be able to feed ourselves, we might not be able to feed our children, then immediately our logic brain turns off and our emotional brain starts to fake the logic talk, right? So it says like, well, what happens if this book doesn't sell? What happens if this? What if this? What if Amazon goes away? What if KU goes, right? Like we start to have those cycles and we don't realize that what our brain is trying to do is find the lion. It's trying to figure out what do I, throw the spear at, or what do I shoot, or what do I run, and where do I go? What's the path the lion is taking? How do I get away from it? Like those are really the survival response mechanisms. It's why so many of us dread going into our inbox, because we have these fight or flight responses that might be a light survival response. It might not be as big as like the sales going down, but we avoid that because we know that there's a physical location where that frustration lies, in my inbox. If I can just avoid my inbox, I won't have to face that lion or face that fear. But if I don't acknowledge that when I feel that level of fear, that's not a time for my logic brain to be talking to me, because that's not actually my logic brain talking. It's my emotional brain. And when my emotional brain is talking, I need to regulate my body. And as soon as I start to feel that spiral, that fear, I need to stop and have a moment. And there are different ways that you can do this, different mechanisms. There's like some people do the sift technique. Some people do like grounding, where they're doing the 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, 3 things you smell, 2 things you touch, things like that. But the goal is to just create enough space between listening to that logic spiral and not listening to it, that you can calm the body back down, remind yourself there's always something that I can do. There's always some agency that I have. And this is really important, because what a lot of us are doing is we have this fixed mindset thinking in that moment, where if I give this up right now, I'm never going to have it again. I'm never going to have this opportunity or this momentum. If I stop now, I'm never going to. And that never always thinking is almost always a signal, not 100% of the time, but almost always a signal that you have shifted out of logic brain and are now into emotion brain. But your brain is still going to talk to you and sound like logic, like, well, let's strategize this. What if we did a better marketing plan, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, no. You are not in your logic brain anymore. Let's get out of that space, walk away from the situation, calm the physical body, put the phone down, stop scrolling social media, stop looking at author groups, get off of threads, whatever it is, to shut down TikTok, whatever you need to do, because the fear response is not being helpful, because there is no thing inside of your actual environment that needs that level of fear. There are things that need a fear response for sure. What I'm not saying is just don't worry about it. Everything's going to be fine. Not saying that at all. What I am saying is if we continue to sit inside that emotion spiral, we lose access to our agency. We lose access to our creativity. We lose access to our community, because we don't allow people to be regulated around us when we are that dysregulated. We want everyone to be dysregulated around us. So when we have those moments, all I want us to do is just trust that if I solve the body problem, like and problem is the wrong word, but it's the source of the current spiral. But if I can fix that, and again, I caveat this all the time, if you have generalized anxiety disorder, this methodology is not for you. Follow whatever your therapist and or psychologist and or doctor tells you to do. This is very different, right? But if we can disconnect enough from that space and solve the body problem in that moment and have enough regulated brain space, we're going to be able to remind ourselves, oh, okay, I need to find some financial security. I need to go find a day job, because I know in my logic moments, I know that I will have more chances. I know, especially if you listen to this podcast or watch this YouTube channel, I know that there will always be more chances in the future. I know that even in disruption, when things change, things always normalize again. The whole like when disruption happens, there are still always going to be people who do the same thing that they've always been doing, right? There are still carpenters, even though we also have IKEA. Like there is not a danger that for the rest of your life, nothing is ever, right? That always never thinking is so often a signal that you are getting into that fear space, and we need to calm the fear and regulate. It's why so many of us need so much more community than we are finding, because when you are behind the computer, you are alone in your dysregulation. And part of the problem with the internet and just social media and email and everything is that you are such a better target for everyone's stuff when you're dysregulated. So the internet favors dysregulation. It favors showing and sending you things that are going to make you so afraid that you feel like you have to continue, you have to go looking, you have to deep dive, right? It sends you things that favor dysregulation because behind your computer, behind your phone, you can't mass regulate people. You have to regulate people individually. The closest we can get is stuff like this, where I'm talking to a smaller group of people and reminding us to do the things that will help us to stay regulated and to help us disconnect from the dysregulated spaces, because the internet is made to dysregulate us. It's not intentional. Nobody's doing it because they don't like you or because they want you. Well, I'm not going to say nobody. There are for sure people who benefit off you being afraid. So there are people who want you to be afraid. But the problem is, once you get regulated, it's so tenuous that even one breath is potentially going to send you back down below the line again and is going to get dysregulated again. So I think the hard part about being online regularly is that it's so easy to be dysregulated and it's so hard to stay regulated. So I'm again encouraging people to be cautious about your social media use. But the primary reason that I made this video was to talk about the fact that the majority of people do better when their creativity is not tied to their financial security. So I want to talk about personality stuff just for a second, because I think that is the other really important piece in this discussion, is that there are some of us who actually need more space in our days to be able to think and process. And our creativity works best when we have something that isn't writing to focus on. So it gives our brain the opportunity to shuffle stuff back into the back of our brain and let us process. And this is strategic thinking strengths. People, intellection is the most common, but there are others. But strategic thinking strengths dominant people, this is the most likely your space, right? Where the more you tie your well-being to writing, the more necessary it is for you to be able to compartmentalize effectively or to regulate yourself effectively, so that you aren't constantly worried about something that you can't know in the moment. Like, you can't know how a book is going to release. You can't know how Amazon ranking is going to affect you. You can't know how industry disruptions are going to affect you. The only thing you can know for sure is, if I don't stay regulated, I can't stay in my creativity. I can't stay in the manuscript. And whatever happens, I will be able to handle it. And so we focus more in those spaces on, there is no such thing as only this time, only one chance. There's no such thing as that stuff. Like, there's always going to be openness in entertainment industries and creative industries. There's always going to be room for people to take off new, to do things that no one's been doing before. There's always going to be human space, right? So I think part of the difficulty about us in the moment that we're dysregulated is we can't connect to any of those things that we know. And some of you need to keep this video on a link somewhere that you just play it consistently for yourself when you start to get too dysregulated. Because for some of you, and I can't tell you how many emails I get every week about this, I get either DMs, social media tags, or emails about the fact that you listen to my voice to be regulated, that my voice helps you. So I think one of the things I want to do in the future is create more opportunity for those places to be visible, for my voice to be able to say the things that you need to hear. So when we're talking about creativity and our strategic thinking brains and the space that we need, when you need that in order to function and be creative, if you have to sacrifice for a time being a full-time author or aiming at being a full-time author so that you can continue to be creative and continue to make space for your writing and continue to feel secure, then that's what you have to do. It's not going to promise that your future won't include more money or that you couldn't go back to being a full-time writer at some point. It's just right now, you are too important to not take care of. We need your physical body and your psychological self to be as safe as possible. So I started off with don't quit your day job, right? Which is, for me, maybe the most important message that we can have right now. Because in the middle of insecurity, especially financial insecurity, the more your bills are paid, the easier it's going to be for you to not worry about things. So anything you can do to increase security, any budget cuts you can make, any extra money you can make from side things, any of that is going to help you. Any way that you can get your creativity bolstered is going to help you. And I think there is a imperativeness to protecting our security and our creativity right now because we need these things to get us through difficult times. And anytime we undergo either national or international difficulty, anytime we undergo financial or economic distress, which we are in the middle of and are headed for more, we need to be able to have that security and safety, especially of our creativity. And some of us need so much more space, so much more quiet, so much more connection, so much more community than we're allowing ourselves because our fear spirals are causing us to be so connected to more sources of let's try to fix this. And what I'm trying to argue for is let's instead create as much security as possible and then allow us in our secure state to make decisions about what to do. And every time we start to feel, and again, if you have generalized anxiety disorder, ignore me, but every time we start to feel that kick up, that we want to make sure that we are doing our absolute best to maintain all of the security and safety that we can inside ourselves. And again, some of us need to just stop with social media, email, news, market, like all of the input. Yeah, so that'll be a different video. We'll talk about that at other places. But because we have 57% of writers who have intellection in their top 5 strengths, this is an imperative need to make sure that we're always protecting our low stakes life as much as possible, protecting our security and our peace so that we can have the creativity that we need to produce what we need to produce and to do all the things that we need to do to maintain a sense of internal security in ourselves. Okay, we'll be back with more on the Quitcast next week. I'm going to do a few more one-off QTPs like this for a little bit because I have some topics that I want to get through. So tune in next time and see what we're going to question the premise of. So thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you on the next Quitcast. Bye.